I had lived in that house long before my daughter-in-law learned how to pronounce its address. Every wall carried the quiet proof of my existence. The chipped paint where my son once dragged his toys, the kitchen window I scrubbed every morning before work, the staircase where I waited for him on exam days pretending not to worry. It was never just a house to me. It was my life folded into concrete and wood. Yet somehow, standing inside it that afternoon, I felt like an intruder waiting to be discovered. The tension had been growing for months, not loud, not dramatic, just sharp enough to cut if you weren't careful. My daughter-in-law had mastered a certain politeness that excluded warmth. She spoke to me the way people speak to neighbors they tolerate, not family they respect. She reorganized cabinets without asking. She referred to the living room as our space while glancing at me like I was temporary. My son noticed none of it, or maybe he chose not to. Men often mistake silence for peace. That morning, my son left for work as usual. He hugged me quickly, distracted, already late. She followed him to the door, adjusting his jacket, smiling in a way she never smiled at me. When the door closed behind him, the house felt different. Not empty, hostile. She didn't speak to me. She grabbed her bag, checked her phone, and jingled her keys loudly, making sure I heard them. I assumed she was stepping out briefly. I went to my room to rest, telling myself not to read into small things the way older women are accused of doing. I was lying down when I heard the front door close. Then the sound that froze me, the lock, not once, twice, the deadbolt. At first I laughed under my breath. Surely it was habit. Surely she hadn't locked the house with me inside. I waited. Minutes passed. I stood up and walked to the front door. I turned the handle. It didn't move. I turned it again, harder this time. Nothing. I called her name. No answer. I knocked from the inside like someone begging to be acknowledged. The house echoed back my own helplessness. That was the moment it stopped being an accident in my mind. She knew I was inside. I sat on the sofa, the same one I had bought with my first bonus after years of working overtime, and waited. Not in panic, in clarity. I replayed every comment she had made about privacy, every suggestion about independent living, every time she mentioned that couples needed space. This wasn't about forgetting. This was about removing. When she finally returned, hours later, she walked in confidently until she saw me standing there. Her expression shifted quickly, surprise sliding into something rehearsed. "Oh," she said lightly. "I didn't know you were home." She smiled, the kind of smile meant to close a subject before it opens. She said she thought I had gone out. She said she didn't realize I was inside. She said it was an honest mistake. I didn't interrupt her. I watched her carefully, the way you watch someone who believes they are winning. I asked one question calmly. "Then why did you lock the deadbolt?" She paused, just for a second, long enough. That pause told me everything. She wanted me to leave, not loudly, not cruelly, quietly. She wanted the house to forget me before my son noticed I was gone. What she didn't know, what she had never bothered to ask, was that this house was not theirs. It never had been. It was on my name, every paper, every signature, every brick. I didn't say it that day. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I simply nodded and walked back to my room, letting her believe her performance had worked. Because sometimes the strongest response is silence paired with truth waiting patiently. That night, lying in my bed, I realized something painful but freeing. I was no longer fighting to belong. I already did. And soon, she would understand exactly whose house she had tried to lock me out of. After the day she locked the house and pretended it was an accident, something inside me shifted quietly but permanently. I stopped trying to earn space in my own home. I stopped adjusting my steps to avoid conflict. Instead, I began observing. I noticed how my daughter-in-law changed her tone depending on who was in the room. With my son, she was gentle, almost fragile. With me, she was polite but distant, as if I were a piece of furniture she could not yet move. Meals became formal. Conversations became careful. And underneath it all was a pressure that never left, the pressure of someone waiting for you to disappear on your own. My son worked long hours. He trusted his home to be peaceful in his absence. He did not see how silence can be weaponized. He did not hear the small comments framed as concern. "You should rest more. At your age, stairs are dangerous. Maybe you'd be happier closer to your sister." Each sentence sounded harmless, but together they formed a clear message. "You don't belong here anymore." I never argued. I never defended myself. I had learned long ago that people reveal more when you let them speak freely. One afternoon, I came back early from the clinic and heard her on the phone. She did not know I was home. Her voice was sharp with certainty, not the sweetness she used around my son. She said things about patience running out, about how some people refuse to understand hints. Then she said something that settled deep in my chest. She said the house would feel lighter once I was gone. I stood there holding my bag, not shocked, not angry, just clear. This was not misunderstanding. This was intention. That night, I took out the old file I kept hidden at the back of my cupboard. Documents yellowed with time, receipts, ownership papers, my husband's handwriting steady and sure. I remembered the day he insisted everything be registered in my name. He had said life changes and people change, but security must never depend on moods or relationships. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. That night, I understood he had been protecting me from a future he would not live to see. The next day, she confronted me again, this time more directly. She said she felt suffocated. She said she needed space to build her marriage. She said she did not want conflict, but something had to change. I listened without interrupting. Then I asked her if she had ever considered what would happen if I did not leave. She laughed nervously and said everyone leaves eventually. I told her calmly that some people don't leave because they are not guests. The color drained from her face when she realized I was not speaking emotionally. I was speaking legally. She asked me what I meant. I told her the house was mine, not inherited through my son. Not shared, mine. I watched realization spread slowly, painfully. Her confidence collapsed into silence. She tried to say she did not know. She tried to say things would have been different. I did not argue. I simply told her that intention does not change based on information, only behavior does. When my son came home that evening, the house felt heavier than ever. She barely spoke. He noticed. He always notices when something is wrong, even if he doesn't understand it immediately. Later that night, he sat beside me and asked quietly if I was happy here. I told him the truth. I told him everything: the locked door, the pretending, the pressure. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I told it the way one tells facts that cannot be undone. He was silent for a long time. Then he did something I did not expect. He went to her room and closed the door. I heard their voices rise for the first time, not shouting, but firm. My son asking questions he had avoided for too long, her trying to justify what could not be justified. When he came back, his eyes were red. He told me he was sorry. He told me I would never be asked to leave my own home again. The next morning, she came to me, not confidently, not strategically, but ashamed. She apologized without excuses. She admitted she wanted me gone. She admitted she thought the house belonged to my son. She admitted fear had made her cruel. I accepted her apology without warmth and without rejection. Some apologies are beginnings, some are lessons. This one was both. Life did not become perfect after that. But it became honest. Boundaries were clear. Respect was no longer optional. She learned that homes are not claimed through manipulation, and that women who survive long enough learn how to protect themselves quietly. And I learned something too: that dignity does not require shouting. Sometimes it only requires patience, truth, and the courage to stay exactly where you belong. After the truth came out, the house did not suddenly feel peaceful. If anything, it became sharper. Every sound carried meaning. Every silence had weight. My daughter in law became careful, not kind. Carefulness is not the same thing. It is what people use when they are afraid of losing ground. She moved through the house like someone walking on glass, measuring her words, watching my reactions, trying to understand how much power I truly held and how much I was willing to use. I did not change my routine to make her comfortable. I woke early, prayed, made my tea, opened the windows like I always had. The house remembered me even if she wished it wouldn't. My son tried to act normal, but I could see the strain in him. He was caught between the woman he married and the mother who raised him, and now he knew the conflict was not imagined. It was built intentionally, one small action at a time. One evening, relatives came over unannounced. My daughter in law suddenly became warm, attentive, generous. She laughed loudly, she served tea herself. She spoke about family unity. I watched her performance quietly. Then, as if by accident, she mentioned how difficult it is to care for elders who refuse to accept change. The room went quiet. All eyes moved toward me. That was her way. Never direct, always disguised as concern. I set my cup down slowly and said nothing for a moment. Then I smiled and told the guests how grateful I was that my husband had insisted the house remain in my name so I would never feel like a burden in my old age. I did not look at her. I did not need to. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Someone cleared their throat, the topic changed, but the message had landed. That night, my son confronted her again. This time there was no confusion. He told her manipulation was still manipulation, even when wrapped in politeness. He told her respect could not be selective. He told her the house was not a prize to be won, but a home to be shared with dignity. She cried, not loudly. Quiet tears, the kind that come when control slips away. Days passed, then weeks. She stopped trying to push me out, but she had not stopped resenting my presence. I could feel it when she watched me from across the room. I could feel it in the way she tightened when my son laughed with me. One afternoon, she finally asked me something honest. She asked how I managed to stay so calm when I knew she wanted me gone. I told her the truth. I said I had already survived worse. I had survived losing my husband, raising a child alone, building a life where no one handed me anything. Compared to that, her hostility was noise. What mattered was not winning against her. What mattered was not shrinking for anyone ever again. She looked at me differently after that. Not with affection, but with something closer to understanding. Power, when quiet, is unsettling to those who rely on control. That realization stayed with her, then something unexpected happened. She fell ill, not dramatically, not tragically, but enough to slow her down. My son stayed home to care for her. I helped quietly. I cooked. I checked on her medicine. I did not remind her of the past. I did not seek gratitude. Vulnerability has a way of stripping people down to what they really are. One evening, she held my hand without looking at me and said she had been afraid. Afraid of losing her place. Afraid of being replaced. Afraid that love was a competition she had to win. I told her love is not taken, it is grown, and growth requires space, not force. The house softened after that, not perfectly, not magically, but honestly. Boundaries were no longer battlegrounds, they were lines of safety. My son slept better. The tension eased. And she began, slowly, to build something real instead of trying to erase what already existed. I knew then that my staying had done more than protect me. It had forced truth into the open. And truth, once seen, changes everyone it touches. The story was not over yet. But for the first time, I felt the next chapter would not be written in fear. Just when I believed the hardest part was behind us, life tested the truth of that belief. Stability can feel real until someone decides to disturb it. My daughter in law had grown quieter, more measured, but silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes it means planning. I sensed it in the way she started asking questions again, not sharp ones, but careful ones. Questions about documents, about wills, about what happens to houses when people grow old. She asked them casually, as if curiosity had suddenly found her. I answered honestly but briefly. I had learned not to give more than necessary. One afternoon, my son told me they were considering taking a loan. He spoke gently, as if cushioning the idea would make it harmless. I listened and asked what they planned to use as collateral. He hesitated. That pause told me everything. The house, my house. I looked at him and asked if he had already discussed this with his wife. He nodded. That hurt more than I expected. Not because of the loan, but because of the assumption that my consent was secondary. That evening, I called a family meeting. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I placed the ownership papers on the table and told them clearly that the house was not available for risk, leverage, or negotiation. I said I would help them in other ways, but not by gambling my security. My daughter in law's face hardened. She said families support each other. I replied that support does not mean sacrifice demanded through pressure. The argument that followed was not loud, but it was heavy. She said I was thinking only of myself. I told her that survival teaches you to think clearly, not selfishly. My son sat between us, torn, exhausted, finally understanding that love does not mean pleasing everyone at once. That night, I overheard them arguing in their room, words spilled that could not be taken back. She accused him of choosing me over her. He told her she was forcing choices that should never exist. The walls carried every sentence. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if staying had saved my dignity but fractured his marriage. The next morning, she did something I did not expect. She left, packed a bag, and went to her parents' house. No drama, no confrontation, just distance. My son stood in the doorway long after she left, unsure whether to follow or stay. I told him to go. Not because I wanted him away, but because avoidance only grows wounds. He returned days later alone. He told me the truth. She had admitted she still felt threatened by me, that my presence reminded her of things she did not want to face. Control, fear, insecurity. He said she was not ready to change as much as she claimed. Hearing that hurt him more than it hurt me. Parents expect pain. Children do not. Weeks passed without her. The house grew quieter but not empty. My son began to heal in small ways. We talked more. We laughed again. He admitted he had ignored warning signs because he wanted peace too badly. I told him peace built on silence always collapses. Then she returned, not with demands, not with anger. She came alone and sat across from me like a person meeting herself for the first time. She said she had been ashamed, not of what she did, but of why she did it. She said she did not know how to be in a family where she could not control the narrative. I listened. That was all she asked for. I did not forgive her immediately. Forgiveness earned too quickly loses meaning. But I told her she could stay, as long as truth remained louder than fear. She agreed without hesitation. Something shifted that day, not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden. The house did not belong to tension anymore. It belonged to honesty. And I realized then that strength does not always look like standing firm. Sometimes it looks like allowing people to confront themselves without interference. The real test was not ownership of walls and rooms. It was whether hearts could learn to live without trying to dominate space. The next chapter was coming. And this time, I sensed it would demand more courage from all of us, not just me. I thought honesty would calm the storm, but truth has a way of stirring what people hoped would stay buried. After my daughter in law returned, the house felt different again, not tense like before, but fragile, like glass after a crack. We spoke politely, carefully, as if every word could reopen something neither of us wanted to face too directly. My son tried to keep balance, moving between us with quiet effort, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Love had turned into constant alertness, and that is not how a home should feel. One evening, as I was folding laundry in my room, I heard her crying in the kitchen. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind of crying that slips out when someone is alone with their thoughts. I stayed where I was at first. I had learned that rushing in to fix things often steals people the chance to understand themselves. But the sound stayed with me, heavy and real, so I went out. She wiped her face quickly when she saw me, embarrassed, defensive. I did not ask what was wrong. I simply sat across from her. She surprised me then. She said she had grown up watching her own mother disappear inside a marriage, living in someone else's house, never secure, never respected. She said when she married my son and moved into this house, something inside her panicked. She did not see me as a person at first. She saw me as a future version of herself, dependent, waiting, powerless. And instead of confronting that fear, she tried to push it away by pushing me out. That was the first time I truly understood her, not as someone cruel, but as someone deeply afraid. Fear does not excuse harm, but it explains it. I told her my story then, not the dramatic parts, just the quiet ones. How after my husband died, people spoke to me as if I was already fading. How ownership of this house was the one thing that kept others from deciding my fate for me. How I never intended to compete with her, only to exist. She listened differently that night. Not with folded arms or sharp eyes, but with stillness. When my son came home, he found us sitting together, not close, not distant, just present. He looked relieved in a way that made my chest ache. But peace never arrives all at once. A few days later, I overheard a phone call. She was speaking to her mother, frustration spilling out again. I did not catch every word, but I heard enough. She felt trapped. She felt judged. She felt she had compromised too much. That night, my son asked me quietly if I would ever consider moving out just to give them space. He did not demand, he asked, and that hurt more than if he had shouted. I told him the truth. I said I would never abandon my home to make someone else comfortable, but I would never trap him between loyalty and marriage either. I reminded him that a partnership only works when both people take responsibility for their fears instead of assigning them to someone else. He nodded, but I could see the weight he carried. The turning point came unexpectedly. One morning, she handed me a folder. Inside were documents from a lawyer. She had gone on her own. She had asked about boundaries, shared ownership, legal clarity. She said she needed structure, not control. That she was tired of feeling threatened by shadows. She wanted to build something that did not rely on pushing someone else down. I looked at her and saw effort, not performance. That matters. We agreed on clear terms. The house would remain mine. They would contribute fairly. Decisions would be discussed, not assumed. Simple things, but powerful when spoken aloud. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was hidden, and I realized something important. Respect does not come from age or authority. It comes from refusing to disappear quietly. What I did not know then was that life had one more lesson waiting for us, one that would test whether these changes were real or just temporary calm. Because families are not tested when things are easy. They are tested when something breaks again. The calm we built did not announce itself as fragile, but I felt it in small things, in pauses that lasted a second too long, in smiles that appeared only when someone was watching. Life continued on the surface, meals shared, bills discussed, laughter returning in pieces, yet underneath it all there was a quiet question waiting to be answered. Could we truly live together without one of us shrinking to make room for the other? I did not voice that question, but I carried it with me through every room of the house. Through every morning I woke up and reminded myself that dignity is not loud, it is steady. The test came when my health failed me unexpectedly. It was not dramatic, no collapse, no hospital rush in the middle of the night, just a slow exhaustion that settled into my bones and refused to leave. One morning I could not get out of bed without help. My son noticed first. He hovered, worried, offering to call a doctor, asking if I needed anything. She stood at the door quietly, watching, measuring something I could not yet name. In that moment, vulnerability stripped me of all defenses. I was no longer the owner of the house or the woman with documents and boundaries. I was just an aging mother who needed assistance. For a brief, frightening moment, I wondered if this was what she had feared all along, that I would become a responsibility, an anchor she did not ask for. That fear sat heavy in my chest, heavier than the illness itself. But then something unexpected happened. She stepped forward. She did not sigh or hesitate. She helped me sit up, brought water, stayed longer than necessary. Not out of duty, but attention. That difference matters. Over the following weeks, as I recovered slowly, I saw her differently. She handled things without complaint, without turning my weakness into a weapon. My son noticed too. I could see the relief in him, the way his shoulders finally dropped, the way he no longer looked like a man constantly choosing between two lives. But I also saw something else in her. Fear again, quieter now, not of me, but of herself. Of what she might become if she repeated patterns she had sworn to escape. One evening, when the house was quiet and my son was out, she came into my room and sat down. She told me she had not slept well since the day she locked the door. She said the shame did not fade, it only changed shape. She admitted that when she saw me ill, she realized something that scared her more than sharing a house. She realized that power can disappear overnight, and when it does, the only thing left is how you treated people when you had it. That conversation shifted something permanent. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness spoken aloud, but recognition. She finally saw me not as a threat or an obstacle, but as a woman who had survived enough to refuse being erased. I told her something I had never told anyone before, that after my husband died, I stayed strong not because I was brave, but because no one gave me permission to fall apart. Strength, I said, is often just what remains when weakness is not allowed. A few days later, my son told us he had been offered a job in another city. It was a good opportunity, one that would change their future. He was torn, worried about leaving me alone, worried about what it would mean for their marriage. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him to go, not someday, not maybe. Go when the time comes. I told him this house had held me through worse storms than loneliness, and that love should not feel like a chain. She looked at me then with something close to gratitude. Not relief, but respect. The kind that does not need words. In that moment, I knew the house had done its job. It was never meant to trap us together. It was meant to teach us how to stand without pushing others down. What they did not know yet was that I had already made a decision of my own, one that would soon change the shape of all our lives, and test whether what we had built was strong enough to last beyond shared walls. I did not tell them about my decision right away. Some choices need time to settle before they are spoken, not because they are uncertain, but because they carry weight. While my son prepared for the move and my daughter in law balanced excitement with guilt, I began putting my own life in quiet order. I met with a lawyer, not out of fear, but clarity. I reviewed documents I had not looked at in years. That house, the one that had become a battlefield of pride and insecurity, was still mine, fully and legally, but ownership does not always mean attachment. Sometimes it simply means responsibility. One afternoon, I called them both into the living room. I could see tension return immediately, old habits rising before new understanding could stop them. I told them calmly that I had decided to renovate part of the house and rent it out. Not to strangers, but to a small family who needed stability, the kind of stability I once fought to keep. I explained that I would continue living there, but not as a silent presence in the background. I would live actively, independently, with my own routines, my own income, my own boundaries. This house would no longer be a symbol of control or fear. It would be a place that served life. My daughter in law's eyes filled with tears. Not defensive tears, not angry ones, but the kind that come when shame finally releases its grip. She apologized then, fully, without excuses, without softening the truth. She said she locked that door because she believed power came from removing someone else. She said she had never seen strength that did not demand space until she saw me refuse to leave mine. That apology mattered because it came with change, not promises. My son cried too, quietly. He said he had spent months feeling like a failure, unable to protect either of us without hurting the other. I told him that love is not about protection from discomfort, it is about honesty that allows growth. I reminded him that families break not because of conflict, but because no one is brave enough to face it without running. The day they left for their new city was simple. No dramatic goodbyes, no unspoken resentment. She hugged me tightly, longer than expected, and whispered thank you. Not for the house, not for permission, but for not becoming what fear wanted me to be. I watched them drive away from the doorway that once trapped me inside, and instead of emptiness, I felt space. Space to breathe, to exist without apology. Weeks passed. The house grew quieter, but not lonely. I filled it with purpose. The new family moved into the renovated space. Laughter returned in a different rhythm. I began volunteering at a community center, something I had postponed for years. I traveled short distances, things I had once thought were no longer meant for someone my age. I learned that age does not close doors, it simply changes how you open them. One evening, my daughter in law called me. She told me she had started therapy, that she was finally confronting the fears she had mistaken for control. She said she understood now that respect cannot be forced and that belonging cannot be stolen. Hearing that did not make me proud, it made me peaceful. Sometimes I sit in the same room where I was once locked in, remembering the panic, the humiliation, the quiet realization that someone wanted me gone. And I smile, not because it did not hurt, but because it did not win. That house remained mine, yes, but more importantly, I remained mine. No door can trap a woman who knows where she stands. And that is the ending people rarely talk about. Not revenge, not humiliation. Just dignity restored, lessons learned, and a family that finally understood that strength does not come from pushing someone out, but from standing firm without cruelty. This was never just a story about a house. It was about a woman who refused to disappear quietly and taught everyone around her that shame belongs to those who try to erase others, not to those who survive.